Russia is actively testing its nuclear deterrent. Iran is systematically closing the breakout time to a fissile core. Israel is preemptively dismantling Iranian forward operating bases in Lebanon, abandoning the previous doctrine of containment. The Israeli Air Force is executing a structural degradation of Hezbollah's infrastructure. Simultaneously, armored divisions are preparing to liquidate the remaining Hamas operational capabilities in Gaza. The Middle East has been locked in a state of geopolitical paralysis for 30 days. The catalyst is structural. Washington and Tehran are trapped in a cyclical, zero-sum negotiation loop. Are we observing the mechanical countdown to a global conflict? Today, we map Iran's strategic pivot. We will detail the retrieval of ballistic assets from targeted ruins and quantify the direct technological transfer from Moscow to Tehran. Did the Russian Federation provide the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps with the asymmetric capability to counter American air supremacy? The leverage is shifting. Central Command reports a strict naval embargo on Iran. The Vice President of the United States claims diplomatic progress. Yet, the IRGC is establishing a sovereign toll system in the Strait of Hormuz, backing it with a credible military threat. The Iranian doctrine is binary: survival or total war. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin secured a strategic alignment in Beijing with Xi Jinping, mere days after the American diplomatic delegation departed. Russia is currently projecting power across NATO's eastern flank with comprehensive nuclear readiness exercises. How does a Pacific summit dictate Middle Eastern ballistics? The cause and effect is absolute. I am James Spencer Hayes. My usual counterpart is currently off-grid. I am on the ground, bypassing the noise to deliver the raw operational realities from Israel and the strategic containment of the IRGC, the central bank of regional instability. Today is May 20th. Knowledge is your only hedge against volatility. Share this analysis. Distribute the data. Let us look at the underlying mechanics. Vladimir Putin's arrival in Beijing to meet President Xi Jinping, closely trailing the American visit, is not mere diplomacy. It is market signaling. Concurrently, his deployment of nuclear forces for broad exercises alters the risk premium for Western intervention. We will dissect the macroeconomic linkage between this posturing and Iranian leverage. A structural deficit of clarity dominates the Washington-Tehran axis. The region is oscillating between a high-probability military escalation and a statistically fragile diplomatic off-ramp. This instability priced into the market follows President Donald Trump's calculated decision to pause a kinetic strike, theoretically to buy diplomatic runway. But analyze the board. Both the United States and Iran are leveraging a dual-track strategy. When the American strike was aborted yesterday, Tehran did not register relief. They registered weakness. They responded with an unprecedented structural provocation. Iran instantiated a new maritime authority specifically to extract transit tariffs in the Strait of Hormuz. By doing so, Iran is actively rewriting the operational parameters of global maritime trade. They are projecting to the market that they did not merely survive the standoff, but hold the leverage to tax the global economy. That is not a regional policy shift. That is a hostile takeover of global supply chains. Recent communications from the executive branch indicate systemic friction within the American administration regarding the absence of a cohesive containment model. The data is clear. Neither macroeconomic sanctions nor the threat of kinetic intervention has altered Tehran's baseline demands. The spread between the two negotiating positions is mathematically unbridgeable. American military intelligence models indicate that during the 30-day operational pause, Iran systematically optimized its asymmetric deployment strategies for a secondary engagement with U.S. forces. This Persian Gulf volatility is forcing European markets into an uncomfortable structural reality. After NATO's European bloc applied political friction to halt the American kinetic response, the administration retaliated by strategically reducing troop deployments and air defense systems across the European continent. Consequently, NATO is currently restructuring its entire policy framework regarding the Iranian containment strategy. Furthermore, the tactical mechanics of the regime change model engineered by Jerusalem and Washington were exposed today, revealing a severe miscalculation in risk assessment. Intelligence backchannels indicate that the apparatus selected Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, historically the most fundamentally anti-Western operator in the Iranian executive, as the high-risk candidate to pivot the state post-collapse. A targeted Israeli operation designed to extract him from localized house arrest instead resulted in collateral injury. The immediate causal effect was his operational realignment with the IRGC. The structural plan for rapid leadership transition disintegrated on contact with reality. Operating under the constraints of a high-volatility ceasefire, intelligence out of Beirut confirms a complete stagnation regarding Hezbollah's disarmament protocols. Cross-tabulated polling data exposes severe sociopolitical fractures among Lebanese demographics concerning any formalized normalization with Israel. The IDF Operational Command released data confirming that within a 24-hour cycle, the Israeli Air Force successfully liquidated over 25 strategic nodes in southern Lebanon. The target matrix included decentralized munitions depots, command and control infrastructure, and forward staging grounds utilized to project kinetic force against Israeli assets. Simultaneously, the British vulnerability to foreign capital infiltration has been quantified again. The IRGC has operationalized a financial hub in London. Document leaks, verified by opposition intelligence, expose the Zaralem syndicate engineering a trilateral capital flow network across the United Kingdom, China, and the United Arab Emirates. The operation is designed to launder sovereign wealth directly into IRGC black budgets. The data load is heavy today. Let us dissect the mechanics. I am James Spencer Hayes. I am on the ground, bringing you the unvarnished reality of the Israeli theater and the macro war against the Iranian axis. Before we proceed to the economic impacts, I require you to manipulate the algorithm. Distribute this intelligence briefing. Click the subscribe metric. Track my analysis on social media platforms to maintain a real-time data feed of the ground truth in a militarized economy. I need to quantify the psychological baseline operating in Israel right now. The structural tension dictates that a kinetic event could initiate without preamble. We are existing in a statistical anomaly. The macro-level indicators point to war, yet the micro-level economy functions seamlessly. We are approaching the Shavuot holiday. Consumption is normal, yet, the systemic risk premium is universally acknowledged. A transition to total war could execute within minutes, hours, or days from this current timestamp. The psychological overhead is measurable. Today, conducting a logistical assessment for future deployments, the primary variable introduced by every contractor was identical: uncertainty. The market cannot price the next 2 weeks. Everything is contingent on executive decisions in Washington. The identical variable applies to the northern theater. I embedded with IDF forward units on the Lebanese border less than a week ago. Transients through northern population centers like Kiryat Shmona, you observe a localized economy attempting to function while entirely exposed to immediate ballistic trajectories. It is a bizarre, unsustainable paradigm. The state apparatus, by necessity, is operating at maximum capacity. Early warning radar arrays and signals intelligence are operating at peak sensitivity. Air superiority squadrons are on immediate scramble protocols. The Iron Dome batteries and Tier 1 tactical units are holding at maximum readiness. Yet, the civilian sector continues to generate GDP. Civilians are auditing their reinforced shelters, cataloging emergency provisions, and concurrently allocating capital for holiday travel. This is the paradox of institutionalized resilience. The population is heavily leveraged against the risk, yet refuses to liquidate their standard of living. In previous decades, this threat level generated economic paralysis. Today, it is priced into the daily routine. Educational institutions operate. Commerce flows. The population recognizes that strategic anxiety yields no dividend. We recognize the threat matrix. If a preemptive strike is authorized against Iranian nuclear sites, The retaliatory physics dictate that high-yield ballistics will target the geographic coordinates behind me in Jerusalem, or be intercepted in the low Earth orbit above it. This is not theoretical modeling. We have empirical data from previous exchanges. The Iranian strategic objective is not simply territorial acquisition, it is psychological bankruptcy. The methodology of terror is designed to inject risk aversion into the populace. Maintaining a highly functional, economically robust society in the face of this is an asymmetric counter-offensive against the Ayatollah's regime. Regarding operational readiness, my usual counterpart is offline, managing strategic reserves, and will resume his post on Sunday. Let us address your personal operational capacity. Mobilization is taxing. The transition from high-stakes military deployment back to civilian economic production creates a measurable deficit in physiological resources. The cognitive load does not dissipate when the uniform is removed. I have audited this process personally. Operating in survival mode while attempting to execute professional duties requires an unsustainable energy expenditure. You need a structural biological advantage. That is the utility of Vinia. It is an Israeli biotech supplement engineered from red grape cell matrices. The mechanism of action optimizes vasodilation, increasing oxygenated blood flow to the cardiovascular and neurological systems. Better perfusion equals enhanced cognitive retention, sustained energy metrics, and a reduction in systemic fatigue. I integrated it into my daily protocol during high-stress deployments, and the data supports its continuation. I utilize the coffee medium during the morning cycle. To acquire this operational edge, access vinetbnisrael.com or dial 800-638-1944. The psychological baseline keeps the foundation solid. The biological optimization keeps the edge sharp. We will now return to the macroeconomic data. To understand the current volatility in the Middle East, disregard the political rhetoric and analyze the maritime choke points. In the Strait of Hormuz, revised American naval intelligence has quantified the deployment of approximately 10 autonomous explosive devices. The exact classification of these mines remains unverified, but their very presence introduces a drift variable into a primary energy artery. This transitions the strait from a standard shipping lane into a high-risk matrix of intelligence gathering, naval engineering, and air defense. The calculation is binary. Is Tehran actively pursuing a diplomatic resolution? Or are they utilizing physical denial of area assets to hold the global supply chain hostage? When the American executive issues a 72-hour ultimatum to resume negotiations, the market must price that not as domestic political theater, but as a rigid operational window. When the administration confirms a kinetic strike was within 60 minutes of execution, the threat architecture becomes concrete. Washington is transmitting two distinct data points. First, a rapidly closing diplomatic off-ramp. Second, a guarantee to Tehran. A tactical delay is not a strategic cancellation. The vice president articulated the parameters with clinical precision. Diplomatic progress is logged, but the kinetic option remains fully funded. The macro logic is indisputable. The United States cannot allow Iran to become the primary catalyst for a global nuclear arms race. Washington views this not as a localized dispute over Israeli security, but as a fundamental stress test of global non-proliferation structures. If Tehran breaches the threshold, the barrier to entry for every secondary power disintegrates. This is the structural flaw in the current negotiation model. Iran is not approaching the table from a position of bankruptcy. They are operating from a perceived surplus of leverage. To the IRGC Directorate, surviving weeks of targeted strikes, leadership decapitations, and absolute economic embargoes registers as a net positive. Consequently, their asking price remains exorbitant. Total liquidation of sanctions, repatriation of frozen sovereign wealth, termination of the naval blockade, unrestricted capitalization of the Strait of Hormuz, a complete cessation of kinetic operations across all proxy theaters, including Lebanon, and the absolute retention of domestic uranium enrichment infrastructure. They might negotiate the margins on their stockpile of 60% enriched material, but the sovereign right to enrich is non-negotiable. For Jerusalem and Washington, that is the failure point of the contract. If the centrifuges remain, if the subterranean facilities are intact, and if the engineering core survives, any treaty is simply a subsidized pause before the inevitable breakout. Simultaneously, a separate, non-diplomatic clock is running. American intelligence assessments indicate the IRGC utilized the operational pause to excavate ballistic silos neutralized in previous sorties. They are repositioning mobile launch platforms and reinforcing subterranean architectures bored directly into granite. This data point is critical. If initial American strikes merely collapsed access tunnels rather than liquidating the internal hardware, the IRGC does not face a total rebuild. They execute a localized salvage operation. Clear the debris, reconnect the power grid, re-establish launch capability. Analytically, a collapsed tunnel looks like a successful strike. Operationally, it is merely a temporary disruption. Every 24 hours of ceasefire is a full production cycle for Iranian combat engineers. This introduces the variable of Russian technological transfer. Classified assessments suggest IRGC tactical commands are analyzing American flight trajectories and strike patterns, heavily subsidized by Moscow's signal intelligence. The recent tactical damage sustained by advanced American airframes confirms their algorithmic predictability is being exploited. The U.S. Air Force retains overwhelming systemic superiority, but Iran is running a rapid iteration cycle. Tehran does not need to achieve air supremacy. They simply need to impose an unacceptable cost per sortie, delay operational timelines, and inject risk aversion into Washington's cost-benefit analysis. Therefore, Israeli intelligence is ignoring the diplomatic press releases and auditing Tehran's remaining ledger. How many mobile Erector launchers are operational? What is the salvage rate of subterranean ballistic assets? Are the automated air defense networks relinked? How many active mines are currently drifting in Hormuz? Most importantly, what is the calculated launch density if Tehran determines its regime's survival is compromised? Intelligence modeling suggests the next kinetic exchange will not mirror the previous containment strategy. Iran will not ration its munitions for a protracted engagement. They will optimize for maximum immediate impact. High-density barrages designed to overwhelm interceptor grids before American and Israeli forces can stabilize their operational tempo. Tehran understands their sole leverage over Washington is front-loading the economic and physical costs of intervention. That cost is not exclusively aimed at Israel. The target matrix includes the entire Gulf infrastructure. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, sovereign ports, petroleum refineries, and export terminals are all within the established kill chain. Privately, Gulf proxies are lobbying Washington to extend the diplomatic runway. Structurally, they understand that an undegraded Iran will immediately resume regional extortion. This is the paradox of outsourced security. The Gulf states possess extreme capital liquidity, advanced American hardware, and comprehensive intelligence networks. Yet, historically, they have outsourced the absolute risk of Iranian containment to Washington and Jerusalem. The American administration is currently demanding a broader coalition, not simply to subsidize interceptor costs, but to share the geopolitical liability of neutralizing Tehran. But capital prefers to avoid risk. The moment a Gulf state formally integrates into a kinetic strike package, its energy infrastructure becomes a legitimate military target. This brings us back to the water. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a transit corridor. It is the central nervous system of global energy markets, maritime insurance, and geopolitical leverage. With unmapped explosives in the shipping lanes, claims of sovereign toll extraction, and the constant friction of American naval patrols, Tehran is weaponizing the geography. The risk of systemic failure is astronomical. Wars are rarely initiated by grand, sweeping executive orders. They are triggered by a low-level operator making a mathematically incorrect decision 3 seconds too late. This geopolitical confrontation is not localized to the Persian Gulf. The strategic depth of this conflict extends directly to Beijing. Russian President Vladimir Putin recently concluded a bilateral summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, defining their alignment as an accelerated partnership entering a new structural era. The rhetoric is deliberately mundane, but the economic reality is absolute. Moscow and Beijing are stabilizing their strategic axis precisely as the United States attempts to maximize pressure on Iran. For China, the calculation is not ideological. It is a matter of energy security. If the Strait of Hormuz becomes volatile, if maritime insurance premiums spike, and if a kinetic escalation inflates the baseline cost of Brent crude, the Russian Federation becomes the primary, indispensable energy supplier to the Chinese economy. Instability in the Gulf directly subsidizes Moscow's macroeconomic leverage. When Washington is forced to divert capital and naval assets to secure global maritime trade, it dilutes its capacity to project power on NATO's eastern flank. When Tehran observes this consolidation between Russia and China, it calculates that it possesses a sufficient geopolitical buffer to withstand American ultimata. Concurrently, Russia has activated a comprehensive strategic nuclear exercise. This is a multi-domain mobilization involving tens of thousands of personnel, mobile ICBM launchers, and ballistic missile submarines carrying thermonuclear payloads. Let us avoid alarmism. This does not signal an imminent nuclear deployment. It is a calculated, cold reminder to Western decision-makers that Moscow can escalate the systemic risk profile precisely when the West is already over-leveraged across Ukraine, NATO internal politics, and the Middle East. The structural link to Iran is clear. If Russia provides even passive intelligence, such as flight envelope data or electronic warfare tracking of American assets, they do not need to deploy a single soldier to Tehran. They merely need to make American air tactics predictable. This posturing also targets European risk aversion. By simultaneously maintaining kinetic pressure near the Baltic states and executing strategic drills, Moscow ensures that the West cannot consolidate its focus on the Persian Gulf. This traps the American executive in a structural dilemma. The current administration has stated its intent to terminate the Iranian threat rapidly. Yet, Washington cannot accept a resolution that registers as a strategic retreat. The executive has declared a nuclear-armed Iran an unacceptable outcome, stating that the macroeconomic cost of energy disruption is secondary to the long-term systemic risk of a nuclear breakthrough in Tehran. But the administration also understands that the domestic electorate has a very low tolerance for protracted conflicts, especially when that conflict translates directly to inflation at the fuel pump. Simultaneously, data has emerged regarding the highly irregular intelligence operation involving Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Intelligence reports indicate that at the onset of the conflict, joint planning cells marked him as a high-leverage candidate to stabilize a post-collapse Iranian state. On the surface, this selection seems entirely counterintuitive. Ahmadinejad was historically the architect of Iran's most aggressive anti-Western posturing and the acceleration of its enrichment cycle. However, macro-analysis requires looking at institutional fractures. In recent production cycles, he systematically clashed with the clerical directorate, resulting in his political disqualification and localized confinement. A kinetic strike executed near his compound, designed to neutralize the IRGC security detail monitoring his movements, instead resulted in his injury and compromised the operational security of the extraction plan. Realizing he was a piece on a foreign chessboard, he realigned with the security apparatus. The initiative collapsed. The lesson here is structural. Regime change is not a linear function. Even if you decapitate the political executive, neutralize Tier 1 commanders, and disrupt logistical networks, the Iranian state is a deeply embedded, multi-layered architecture. It is held together by the economic monopolies of the IRGC, internal security mechanisms, institutionalized corruption, and ideological coercion. You cannot dissolve this structure from the exterior without an organized internal force capable of assuming immediate sovereign control. Consequently, the White House is shifting its stated objectives toward quantifiable military degradation, the liquidation of Iran's ballistic stockpiles, the destruction of its naval assets, the embargo of its energy exports, and the structural weakening of its regional proxies. This is a clean, measurable military framework rather than a highly speculative political engineering project. Yet, these variables remain entirely interconnected. If you degrade the ballistics, bankrupt the state, and neutralize the proxies, you fundamentally fracture the regime's internal mechanism of control. This is why the Lebanese theater is currently experiencing intense friction. In the northern sector, the Air Force successfully targeted over 25 strategic nodes. These were not random coordinates. They were localized command hubs and munitions networks designed to project force against the IDF. This is not a secondary theater. If total war with Iran initiates, Hezbollah must choose between immediate, high-intensity intervention or localized containment. From Jerusalem's perspective, Hezbollah cannot be allowed to rebuild its forward threat matrix while global attention is fixed on the Iranian mainland. The Lebanese state possesses neither the political capital nor the monopoly on force to compel Hezbollah to disarm. Therefore, any diplomatic arrangement that ignores the physical presence of these weapons stockpiles is mathematically irrelevant to Israel's long-term security. The same structural reality governs the southern theater in Gaza. The Trump administration has introduced severe sanctions targeting the transnational financing networks of Hamas. These measures target pro-Palestinian logistics fronts, entities linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, and international coordinators laundering capital under the guise of civilian activism. This is a critical data point because it demonstrates that Hamas does not subsist solely on localized tunnels, it relies on international capital flows. In response, Hamas is attempting to regain tactical initiative by leveraging hostages and threatening asymmetric escalation over domestic counterterrorism laws. For Hamas, an abduction is an economic and psychological weapon designed to disrupt the IDF's operational tempo and force a high public policy cost inside Israel. The macroeconomic and geopolitical board is now clearly defined. Iran is playing for time to preserve its breakout capability. The United States is attempting to maintain a credible kinetic threat without absorbing the long-term costs of a protracted war. Israel is maintaining maximum operational readiness to execute simultaneous campaigns across three distinct fronts. Russia and China are exploiting the instability to extract economic concessions and dilute Western hegemony. The Gulf states are caught in a classic security dilemma, fearing immediate infrastructure damage, yet recognizing that a survival scenario for Iran means long-term geopolitical extortion. The fundamental instability of the Middle East stems from the fact that the primary actors are maximizing for completely incompatible outcomes. The American executive requires a rapid, high-visibility victory to secure its political legacy. Tehran requires baseline regime survival, the retention of its enrichment infrastructure, and an exit from the economic embargo. Israel requires the absolute neutralization of an existential ballistic and nuclear threat, not a temporary pause in the headlines. Russia requires the structural exhaustion of the West. China requires a stable, uninterrupted flow of energy at a predictable price point. The timeline is compressing. If Tehran blunders into miscalculating this temporary quiet as a deficit of resolve, the question is no longer whether the conflict resumes, but who initiates the opening salvo, and in which theater. Maintain your access to verified data. Follow this channel. Capitalize on real-time analysis by subscribing to TBN Israel. Ensure you are tracking our ground intelligence feeds across social media platforms to maintain absolute clarity in an era of systematic disinformation. We close with an operational acknowledgement of our underlying principles. Standing with the military and civilian personnel holding the line across the Lebanese border, the Gaza Strip, and the internal security sectors is a matter of historical and strategic alignment. We acknowledge the strategic burden carried by our command structure, from the leadership in Washington to the executive decision-makers in Jerusalem. The geographic reality behind me, this capital city, remains the ultimate testing ground for institutional resilience and geopolitical stability. Maintain your position, optimize your awareness, and I will deliver the next data assessment on our next transmission.